so far we've looked at two ways to find solutions to quadratic equations. The first way we looked at was graphing. When you graph a quadratic equation, the solutions are the places where your parabola crosses your x-axis. So this quadratic equation has two solutions, one right here at -3 and one here at +1. We also looked at factoring. When we factored quadratic equations, we could use our factored form to find our solutions. Once we had it factored, we just made each factor equal 0, and then we solved it, and those were our two solutions. Today we're going to look at solving equations using the square root method. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about square roots. So this symbol here represents a square root symbol. What we're doing when you see this symbol, it's also called a radical symbol, is you're looking for the number that when you multiply that number together by itself, it will equal the number under the square root symbol. So the square root of 9 is going to be 3 because 3 times 3 equals 9. Okay? So looking at the second one here, 36, the square root of 36 is 6 because 6 times 6 is 36. Square root of 81 is 9, and the square root of 225 is going to be 15, because 15 times 15 gives us 225. Now we're going to come back to this in a minute once we can expand your thinking a little bit. I want you to look at what we have down here. So this symbol represents a squared symbol, so we call this a square root, and this is squared. 3 squared means 3 times 3, and 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, so the square root of 9 is 3. 3 squared is 9. These are opposites or inverses, a square root and a square symbol. When we have -3, we have -3 times -3. Well, -3 times -3 is also 9. I want you to hold on to this for 1 minute. We're going to come back and look at this in just a second. Okay, let's look on the next one. We've got 9 squared here. 9 squared is 9 times 9. 9 times 9 is going to be 81. And over here we have -9 squared. So -9 times -9 is also 81. So again, hold on to this fact. And what I want you to look at are these problems here. Okay, we said the square root of 9 was 3. Because the square root is a number times itself. But when you look down here, there are actually two ways to get an answer of 9. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to expand our thinking a little bit here. The square root of 9 is 3, but it's also -3. Okay? So both of these answers are going to be considered our square roots. So again, think about 6. 6 times 6 is 36, but also -6 times -6. So every number is going to have two square roots. It's going to have a positive value and a negative value, okay? Because 9 times 9 is 81, and -9 times -9 is also 81. So when you're taking the square root of a number, you have to be sure that you represent the positive value and the negative value of that number, okay? So if we're looking at the square root of 49, 7 times 7 is 49. Or -7 times -7 is 49. Square root of 25, we've got 5 times 5, or -5 times -5. So in mathematics, we use a symbol to represent the positive and the negative. We call it a plus minus. So what we would do for the square root of 49 is we would write positive or -7. We put both symbols in front of the number. The square root of 25 is positive or -5. So now that we have all that, let's just review our inverses really quickly, and then we'll be ready to solve using our square root method. So remember, when we're doing operations and we want to undo them, we have to use their inverse. So the inverse of addition is subtraction, and the inverse of subtraction is addition. When we want to undo multiplication, we use division, and if we want to undo division, we use multiplication. So these square roots and squares are also inverses. Okay? How do you undo a square root? Well, to undo a square root, you would square the value. So, for example, if I want to undo this square root here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to square that value. This square root symbol and this square symbol cancel each other out. Let me show you. So the square root of 16 is going to be equal to 4. Okay? If I do 4 squared, I get 16. Okay? So if I were to take the square root of 16 squared, what that's saying is take the square root of 16, which is 4, and then square it, and you get 16. So these two cancel each other out. The way you undo a squared value is you take your square root. So if I have 81 here, the way I'm going to undo that 81 is I'll take the square root, and the square root of 81 is going to be positive or negative 9. All right, so now we're ready to get started. To use our square root method to solve quadratic equations, there are a couple things you need to have. So the first thing we're going to look for is we want an equation that's in vertex form. We want a value that's squared, not just an x squared, but something in parentheses that's squared. Okay, and the reason we want this square here is because we're going to undo it using our square root. Now, when you have these vertex form equations, you need to have this squared value by itself on one side of the equal sign. Everything else goes on the other side. So this is one of the few times where your equation does not have to equal 0. It might start out equaling 0, but then you'll move everything around. Okay? From here, we got to do step 2. What we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides. When I take this square root, remember this square root and this square are going to cancel each other out. So I'm going to be left with x minus 3 on this side. When I take the square root of 4, I get 2, but remember it's positive and negative 2. So we got to have both values there. And then, since I have two possibilities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write two separate equations. One equation I'm going to write is going to represent that positive answer. So x minus 3, this doesn't change, but it's going to equal our positive 2. And then I'm also going to write an equation that's x minus 3, but it's going to equal our negative value for our square root, negative 2. And then I just solve each one. So here I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and one of my values could be x equals 5. And then I'm going to do the same thing for that second equation. I'll add 3 to both sides, and I'm going to get x could equal 1. And those are your two solutions using your square root method. Now I want to do two more problems with you. Skip this one for now. Try this one on your own. Pause the video, try it, and then check your answer with me. Okay, so remember, squared values all by itself. So I'm going to start off, I'm just going to take my square root on both sides here, and that's going to leave me with x minus 5 equals, the square root of 1 is positive or negative 1. From here, I'm going to write two equations. One with my positive value, so x minus 5 equals the positive 1, and one with the negative value, oops, it didn't change colors, hang on, where x minus 5 equals negative 1. And then remember, you just solve each one, just like a basic equation. So add 5 to both sides, and over here we get x could equal 4, or I'm going to add 5 to both sides here, and x could equal 6. All right, the reason I wanted to save this one till the end is this one doesn't have just the squared value on one side. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work before we're ready to take our square roots. Because before we can take our square roots, this has to be the only thing on this side. So the first thing I'm going to do, just like any equation that I saw, I have to move this 8 over to the other side. Remember, we always undo addition and subtraction first. So that's going to leave me with 2 times x plus 2 squared equals 8. Okay, now 2 times this, the way I get rid of that is, again, I have to undo this multiplication. I'm going to divide by 2. Now this looks really complicated, but these 2's will cancel out, and this quantity is just going to stay here. So I'm going to have x plus 2 squared. Okay, it still has the squared. We haven't gotten rid of that yet. Equals 4. Okay, now I'm ready to deal with this square. The way we undo a square is we use our square root. So the square and the square root are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with x plus 2 here. And the square root of 4 is positive or negative 2. And then finally, to solve this, my first equation will be x plus 2 equals positive 2. And when we solve that, we see that one of our values could be 0. And then I'm going to solve the other value over here for my negative. So x plus 2 could be negative 2. So I have to subtract 2 on both sides. And I see my other value could be negative 4. Now the last two problems on your capture sheet, I want you to do those as on your own problems, even though they don't say on your own. Use your square root method. Remember, get the quantity that's squared all by itself first, and then take your square root of both sides.